Welcome to the deep dive. We pull out the key bits from lots of sources so you can get up to speed fast.
hmm
Today, we're really getting into basic emotions, looking at the work of Paul Ekman. We've gone through his arguments, stuff from his group's website, iEmotions on measuring emotions, even like how people remember them online, plus some background.
Right. And the goal, really, is for you, the learner, to get a solid handle on what Ekman meant by basic
Yeah, what
emotions.
makes them basic, how they show up,
Yeah.
without it feeling like a heavy textbook.
Exactly. We want to unpack his theory, look at the evidence, but also touch on the cultural side of things, which is super interesting.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What are these basic emotions, according to Ekman?
Well, his starting point, you find this in his paper, An Argument for Basic Emotions, was that certain emotions, and importantly, how we show them on our face, seem to be universal, like across totally different cultures.
Universal, so everyone shows sadness the same way.
Hmm.
Rough.
That's the core idea. He argued each basic one has a unique, universal signal, mostly facial expressions, but also distinct physiological patterns, body responses,
Okay.
and probably specific kinds of situations that tend to set them off. You think about those first six he identified: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise.
Right.
We often recognize those really early on, even in kids. Ekman's thinking was these might be sort of the fundamental building block.
Building blocks for, like, more complex feelings later?
Yeah, potentially. And if you understand these core expressions, it gives you a kind of lens for, well, for reading people, almost like a universal emotional
So
code.
it's the trigger, the body reaction, and the face.
Yeah.
The whole package deal.
Exactly. And he listed other traits too. They tend to kick in fast,
Okay.
don't last too long usually. The appraisal, the way we sort of size up the situation emotionally is automatic,
hmm
and they just happen. You don't decide to feel scared.
Yeah, definitely not. And you mentioned emotion families. What's that about? Is that like different levels of anger or something?
That's it. So anger isn't just one thing. It's a family. You could have maybe slight annoyance or frustration or full-blown rage.
hmm
They all share that core theme. Maybe displeasure, opposition, but very in intensity, maybe slight differences in the facial muscles used.
Okay, like shades of the same color.
Kind of. Or think about fear. Slight worry might just be like eyes widening a bit.
Right.
But intense terror, you see the whites above the iris, eyebrows pulled up and together, different intensity, same basic threat detected signal using similar facial actions, but, more pronounced.
Gotcha. Now that list of six emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, is that the final word? I feel like I've seen those every...
That was the initial set that got a lot of attention, yeah. They really stuck. It's funny, you even see mnemonics for them online. Like someone on Reddit mentioned FAHDSS, FAHDSS.
Yeah, that helps. Shows they've kind of entered pop culture, doesn't it?
It does. But Ekman did propose a longer list later on. Yeah. In a 99 publication, he talked about others. Things like amusement, contempt, contentment, embarrassment, excitement, guilt, pride, relief, satisfaction, sensory pleasure, shame. Quite a few more.
Wow, okay. But are those all basic in the same way, with the universal face and everything?
That's the key question. It goes back to his strict criteria, especially that unique universal signal.
Right.
So while something like guilt is obviously a real and important emotion, does it have one specific face that everyone everywhere recognizes as guilt? Probably not as clearly as, say, surprise.
That makes sense. Some of those definitely feel more complicated. Social, maybe?
Exactly, more layered. There's a table in his argument paper, Table 1, that really lays out the distinctions. It lists 9 characteristics used to separate basic emotions from, say, moods or personality traits.
What kind of characteristics?
Yes. Things like the universal signals we talked about, being present in other primates, the distinct physiology, universal triggers, how the different responses hang together, the quick onset, brief duration, automatic appraisal, and that unbidden quality they just happen to you.
Okay, that's a pretty solid framework. So Ekman lays out the criteria, the lists, but what's the big evidence?
Mhm.
The proof that these are really universal?
Yeah, the crucial evidence comes from his cross-cultural studies. These were pretty groundbreaking.
Oh, so?
Well, he didn't just study people in, like, Western countries and Eastern countries who might have seen the same movies or TV shows.
Okay.
He specifically went to Papua New Guinea, studied the Fore people. They were largely isolated, pre-literate, very little contact with the outside world or Western media.
Ah, So they wouldn't have learned the expressions from us.
Precisely. And he found that they matched photos of facial expressions, those basic 6-to-emotion words or stories, with a really high degree of accuracy, just like people in literate cultures did.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty compelling. Same faces, same labels, totally different worlds.
It's strong support for the idea that these facial expressions are universal signals. And the tool he used for analyzing the faces objectively was vital here. It's called FACS.
FSCS.
Facial action coding system. It's less about judging that looks sad and more about the anatomy. It breaks down every single possible facial movement based on the underlying muscles.
Like which tiny muscle is twitching where?
Exactly. So you can objectively measure and describe a facial expression. Is the corner of the lip pulled down or the inner eyebrows raised? It gives you a code.
Okay.
And this allowed Ekman to show that the specific muscle configurations for, say, fear were the same across these diverse cultures. It took the guesswork out. Originally, researchers had to code this manually from video, which took ages.
I bet.
But now there's software that can help automate it, which is used in things like, well, emotion measurement tech.
So FACS gives the hard data on the universal signals. But, hang on. We all know people express things differently. My stiff upper lip British uncle versus, say, someone more expressive from Italy. How does culture fit in if the expressions are universal?
That's a fantastic point, and Ekman absolutely addressed it.
Yeah.
He made a distinction between the universal expression itself, the underlying muscle pattern, and the cultural rules about showing it.
Rules?
Yeah, he called them display rules. These are the social cultural norms we learn growing up about who can show which emotion to whom and when it's okay.
Ah, okay, like boys don't cry or something like that.
Exactly like that. Or maybe in one culture, it's rude to show anger directly to an authority figure, while in another, it might be more acceptable. So the feeling might be there. The universal anger pattern might be triggered.
But the display rule filters it. You might mask it or tone it down.
Precisely. The Paul Ekman Group website talks a lot about this. So you get these cultural differences in what you actually see people expressing day to day, even if the basic blueprints are universal.
That makes sense. It reconciles the universality with the variation we see.
Right. And culture also shapes what triggers the emotions in the first place.
How so?
Well, the specific thing that makes you feel disgusted might vary hugely. A certain food could be a delicacy one place and utterly repulsive somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely true.
But, Ekman argued, the underlying theme might still be universal. For disgust, the theme is maybe ingesting something potentially contaminating or offensive. The specific item changes, but the core idea triggering the emotion is similar.
Okay, interesting. The trigger is culturally specific, but the type of trigger fits the universal theme.
That's the idea. And then there's language, too. The words we have matter.
You mean like how some languages have emotion words that others don't?
Exactly. The classic example is Schadenfreude in German, that pleasure in someone else's misfortune. English doesn't really have a single perfect word for it.
Right, we have to use a whole phrase.
And the Paul Ekman group site mentions this too. Does lacking the word subtly change how you experience or categorize that feeling? It's an open question. They could give that striking example of Tahitians apparently not having a word for sadness.
Really? No word for sadness. What do they do?
The claim was they tended to attribute those kinds of feelings to being sick.
Wow, that
Yeah.
really makes you think. Does the language limit the feeling or just how you talk about it?
It's a deep question, isn't it? It shows how culture and language really interact with our emotional world. So even if the expressions are universal.
What they mean in a specific situation or how they're interpreted can be really context dependent.
Absolutely.
This brings up another thing I saw mentioned, particularly from the emotions material. The difference between emotions and feelings. Are they the same thing or?
That's a really useful distinction they make. Generally, in this view, emotions are seen as more the raw, instinctual, physiological responses. They happen fast, deep in the brain. Think amygdala, limbic system, your body's immediate reaction.
Like the initial jolt of fear?
Exactly. Feelings, then, are more the subjective interpretation of that emotion. That happens in the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. It's shaped by your past experiences, your thoughts, social learning. It's how you make sense of that raw emotional data.
All right, so emotion is the body's signal. Feeling is the mind's interpretation.
That's a good way to put it. Emotions also notes that emotions are usually brief and intense. Feelings can last longer and might be less intense.
Right.
And crucially, you can measure emotions more objectively. brain activity with EEG or fMRI, heart rate, skin conductance, that kind of thing. Feelings are usually measured subjectively. You ask people how they feel using questionnaires or scales.
Okay, that clarifies things a lot. Emotion is the reaction, feeling is the experience of the reaction.
Pretty much.
Now, microexpressions. These sound almost like science fiction. Tiny, hidden emotions.
They're fascinating and very real. According to the Ekman group, these are super brief facial expressions, like gone in a flash, maybe 125th of a second.
And there's a fact, wow.
Yeah, incredibly fast. And the key thing is, they're thought to be involuntary. They often leak out when someone is trying consciously to hide or mask how they really feel.
So you try to look calm, but a tiny flicker of fear flashes across your face.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Because they're so quick and often we're not even aware we're making them, they can be really hard to spot unless you're trained.
Right.
But they're considered significant for potentially spotting deception or just understanding what someone's genuinely feeling underneath the surface. They distinguish these from macro expressions.
Which are just normal expressions.
Yeah, the obvious ones that last longer, that we see all the time. Micro expressions are the fleeting ones you can easily miss.
Involuntary, huh? That's the crucial part. They slip out.
Seems to be, yeah. And this whole area understanding facial expressions, including these micro ones, has led to some really practical applications.
Like what? You mentioned technology earlier.
Right. iMotions talks about facial expression analysis tech. There's software now, like effective as AFF DEX or the tools iMotions integrates, that can automatically detect and analyze these muscle movements from video.
So computers reading faces for emotions.
Essentially, yes. It makes analyzing emotional responses in research much faster than humans coding it manually.
And where is this actually being used?
Well, iMotions points to a few areas, definitely in research, but also in, say, marketing testing reactions to ads or products.
I can see that.
In education, maybe tracking student engagement. And in psychology and mental health, understanding emotional states better can really help with therapies like CBT or EFT.
Yeah, understanding the emotion is key there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And looking ahead, iMotion suggests we'll see more integration combining facial expression analysis with other measures like eye tracking or heart rate, advances in AI for emotional intelligence, more focus on cultural context, and of course, ongoing ethical discussions about using this tech.
It's amazing how far it's come, from Ekman's early observations in New Guinea to automated AI analysis. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. If we boil down this whole deep dive, what are the main things we've learned about Ekman and basic emotions?
Well, I think first is Ekman's core argument. There seem to be these basic universal emotions. They have distinct characteristics, key among them being those universal facial signals.
Right, the big six, and maybe a few others.
Exactly. Second, while the expressions might be universal, culture plays a huge role through those display rules governing when and how we show emotion. Culture also shapes triggers and even our language for emotion.
The nature versus nurture interplay.
Kind of, yeah. Third, that useful distinction between emotions, the quick physiological responses and feelings, our subjective interpretation and experience of them.
Got it. Body versus mind interpretation.
And fourth, the whole intriguing idea of microexpressions, those tiny involuntary flickers that can reveal hidden feelings, and the tech being developed to analyze them.
Super interesting stuff. Okay, so here's a final thought to leave everyone with. Ekman's work suggests these basic emotional expressions might be a kind of universal human language. If that's true, how could getting better at recognizing and understanding these signals across cultures, despite display rules, actually help us connect better? Could it improve communication, build empathy, especially in our, super interconnected but often divided world? What if we could reliably read those fundamental signals beneath the surface?
Yeah, that's a powerful thought. What would that look like?
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.